On December 28, 1973, President Nixon signed the Endangered Species Act into law. The ESA, as it's commonly referred to, has become one of the most important environmental laws in history. In his signing statement, President Nixon wrote, "Nothing is more priceless and more worthy of preservation than the rich array of animal life with which our country has been blessed. It is a many-faceted treasure of value to scholars, scientists, and nature lovers alike, and it forms a vital part of the heritage we all share as Americans." Congress recognized that many species of fish, wildlife, and plants had gone extinct, and that other species had been depleted to the point that they were in danger of becoming extinct. When Congress passed the Endangered Species Act, it recognized that our rich natural heritage is of aesthetic, ecological, educational, recreational, and scientific value to our nation and its people. The purpose of the ESA is to protect and recover imperiled species and the ecosystems upon which they depend. It is those ecosystems and their habitats that provide the necessary resources for endangered and threatened species to survive and to be able to produce young for future generations. Under the ESA, species may be listed as either endangered or threatened. Endangered means a species is in danger of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range. Threatened means a species is likely to become endangered within the foreseeable future. The ESA is jointly administered by the Interior Department's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Department of Commerce's National Marine Fisheries Service. The Fish and Wildlife Service has primary responsibility for terrestrial species such as birds, mammals, reptiles, amphibians, plants, and invertebrates, as well as for freshwater species, for example fish and mussels. The National Marine Fisheries Service has primary responsibility for marine species such as whales and certain fish, including salmon, which spend a substantial part of their life cycle in the oceans. As of November 2012, there were 1,434 species of plants and animals protected as threatened or endangered in the United States and its territories. There were also 618 foreign species protected under the ESA. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologists take the lead in recovering and conserving our nation's imperiled species by fostering partnerships, employing scientific excellence, and developing a workforce of conservation leaders. As we work in partnership with others, our two major goals are to protect endangered and threatened species and then pursue their recovery, and conserve candidate species and species at risk so that listing under the ESA is not necessary. There is an office in every state across the country with staff working to conserve endangered species and the habitat they depend on. The ESA is divided into 18 sections that work together to prevent species from going extinct by helping to stabilize populations, reduce the threats to their survival, and ultimately help species recover to the point that they no longer require federal protection. The sections work together by providing a framework for identifying those species in need of the ESA's protection, requirements to plan for and implement recovery actions, tools to work together with our partners and the American public to help conserve species and the habitats they depend on, and a process to identify recovery accomplishments leading to the point where a species can be removed from the list. In this overview, we will briefly discuss some of the sections that describe the implementation of the ESA within the United States and its territories. Those sections are Section 4, Listing, Critical Habitat, Recovery, and Delisting and Monitoring. Section 6, Cooperation with States and Territories. Section 7, Federal Agency Actions and Consultations. Section 9, Prohibited Acts. And Section 10, Permits and other exceptions to prohibited acts. Section 4 is the most extensive part of the Endangered Species Act. It covers a number of activities, including how species in need of the ESA's protection are identified and prioritized, the actions needed to recover those species and conserve their habitat, and the process of reaching those recovery goals that allow for a species removal from federal protection. In order to evaluate whether a plant or animal should be listed as endangered or threatened, 5 factors are considered using the best scientific and commercial information available. These are the present or threatened destruction, modification, or curtailment of its habitat or range, overutilization for commercial, recreational, scientific, or educational purposes, disease or predation, the inadequacy of existing regulatory mechanisms, and other natural or man-made factors affecting its continued existence. When a species is listed under the Endangered Species Act, the Service must consider whether there are areas of habitat believed to be essential to the species' conservation. Identifying critical habitat enhances the conservation of listed species by providing important information about the actual and potential distribution of a species and where opportunities may exist to work with our partners. Critical habitat does not affect private landowners who are undertaking activities that do not require federal permits, funding, or approval. As an initial step towards guiding an endangered or threatened species back to health, a recovery plan is developed. The recovery plan outlines the path and actions required to restore and secure self-sustaining wild populations. The implementation of recovery actions for a listed species occurs in 3 phases: reducing or eliminating threats, restoring or maintaining self-sustaining wild populations, and removing species from the list because they have recovered to the point where they no longer need the protection of the Endangered Species Act. The single most important conservation measure for many threatened and endangered species is habitat conservation or restoration. For other species, captive breeding programs may be required, followed by reintroduction into the wild. Such efforts can be used to help increase population numbers. Successful examples of this strategy include the recovery programs for California condors and black-footed ferrets. Section 6 recognizes the key role that states play in conserving and recovering our endangered and threatened native wildlife and plants. The Section 6 program, generally referred to as grants to states, provides funding to states and territories for species and habitat conservation actions on non-federal lands. Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act requires federal agencies to use their authorities to carry out conservation programs to benefit endangered and threatened species. Federal agencies are also required to consult with the Fish and Wildlife Service or the National Marine Fisheries Service to ensure that any action they authorize, fund, or carry out will not be likely to jeopardize the continued existence of a listed species or destroy or adversely modify designated critical habitat. As a result, federal agencies have a unique opportunity and obligation to assist recovery implementation by addressing threats that result from their programs and actions. Once a species is listed, Section 9 of the Endangered Species Act makes it unlawful for any person, including private and public entities, to take individuals of an endangered animal species. The term take means to harass, harm, pursue, hunt, shoot, wound, kill, trap, capture, or collect, or to attempt to engage in any such conduct. Section 10 of the ESA is designed to regulate a wide range of activities that affect endangered and threatened plants and animals and the habitats upon which they depend. Under Section 10, the Service can issue permits that allow limited take of listed species under very specific conditions for scientific purposes or to otherwise enhance the propagation or survival of a species. Endangered species recovery is complex and difficult work, often requiring substantial time and resources. Just as it takes a long time for species to reach the brink of extinction, it takes a long time to bring them back. Many of the endangered species that have fully recovered were the original species listed under federal protection 40 years ago. For 4 decades, the Endangered Species Act has provided a critical safety net for fish, wildlife, and plants that has prevented the extinction of hundreds of imperiled species, stabilized populations of listed species, as well as recovering many others, and conserved the habitats upon which they depend. Today, hundreds of species are stable or improving thanks to management actions of federal agencies, state and local governments, conservation organizations, and private citizens. For more information about the Fish and Wildlife Service's Endangered Species Program, visit our website at www.fws.gov/endangered.